So a question that we get a lot is, did the officer have to read me my Miranda warnings? And if the officer didn't read me my Miranda warnings, what does that mean for the case? When a person is arrested, in order for the officer to be obligated to read that person the Miranda warnings, two things have to be present. One, the person has to be in custody, and two, the person has to be interrogated. So the definition of custody, generally speaking, is that the person isn't free to leave. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're in handcuffs, you're in the back of the patrol car. You could just be standing in front of a police officer and you're not free to leave, and that could be deemed to be in custody. The other is interrogation. So the definition of interrogation is that a person is asked a question by the police officer that's reasonably likely to elicit an incriminating response. So if the officer is just asking you what your name is, what your address is, just these type of procedural information type questions to get to who you are, that doesn't rise to the level of interrogation. So if you are in custody and you are being interrogated, then yes, the officer has to read you your Miranda warnings. So an example of that is that if you are arrested for a DWI and the officer is asking you questions about the DWI in reference to how many drinks have you had, were you coming from a bar establishment, and you are in custody and being interrogated, normally that would rise to the level of the officer having to read you Miranda warnings. For traffic type offenses such as DWI, the Supreme Court of the United States has carved out an exception to the Miranda warnings. So if you are arrested for DWI and the officer is asking you questions related to that intoxication offense, then the officer doesn't actually have to read you your Miranda warnings. If in that same circumstance, let's say you were in possession of marijuana and the officer saw marijuana just sitting on your passenger seat, and the officer transferred from asking you questions about the intoxication issue to, hey, is that your bag of marijuana sitting on the passenger seat? In that context, then the officer would be obligated to read your Miranda warnings because being in possession of marijuana isn't a traffic offense. So that's really the general kind of framework to when an officer has to read you your Miranda warnings, and most of the time they don't.